This is gonna sound kind of weird, but I have a bit of an issue with universally understood popularity in pop culture. Like, I'm kind of bad at knowing what movies are popular enough to be considered memorable to the common folk and the normies. And I sometimes forget that people might not automatically know the movies that I refer to that I assume that they would. Like, I have kind of this core memory of this one time at work where I mentioned the movie La La Land out of the blue. And I vividly remember getting just blank stares when I did so. Nobody knew what La La Land was, and they all chalked it off as me being that weird movie nerd who knows weird movies like La La Land, and kind of just went off for the rest of their day ignoring it. And I remember being absolutely shocked by this, because come on, this was easily the biggest and best movie of 2017 in my mind, because it's been one of my absolute favorite movies as soon as that came out. But no one was aware of La La Land. Once I gave context though, that La La Land was that one movie that almost won the Oscar and it all got swapped. They accidentally announced that one was, but it was the other one called Moonlight. Once I mentioned that whole fiasco, everybody at my work suddenly kind of knew what I was going on about, and they were familiar with that story. Once I associated La La Land with the story, they were sort of familiar with it. And I found that kind of interesting, because while the movie itself might not have been memorable to them, the story was, and the recognition came with that. In reflection, I've come to the conclusion that we often forget as film fans that this knowledge and nerdom when it comes to our stupid little hobby in films is that it all comes in sets of tiers, and that there really isn't one standard set example of a person's pop culture related frame of reference. People only know what they know because they know things and they've seen it, or they know it from offhand out of context references. Kind of like how everybody knows that Scarface says, "Say hello to my little friend," but maybe they haven't actually seen the film itself. And so I guess just as a social piece of advice, as a big movie fan, I just want to start asking everybody to please read the room and try and figure out what people around you might or might not know. Now, obviously this isn't going to always be safely assumed 100% of the time, and some people are going to surprise you. But I'm just saying, obviously your 60-year-old or so boss probably doesn't know certain things, like that Captain America says, "I could do this all day," as somewhat of a catchphrase or whatever. And that, you know, maybe you can't just say that to certain people assuming that they know what they're talking about.
I can do this all day.
Yeah, I know.
Not everything is memorable or considered a classic to everybody, like it might be in your mind. And I think that this all is part of a timeline as well. Like, for instance, the movie Insidious, right? I saw that in my formative years. It's very important to me. It made a huge impact on my tastes growing up. But I know that a lot of older people that were, you know, a bit older at that time probably just cast off Insidious as being one of those other horror movies that came out. It's not that big of a deal. Who cares? Not like all the great shit that came out in my youth, like The Exorcist or whatever. I'm sure there are a lot of people that think this, but I think that we often forget about thinking about things in terms of a timeline, and I do it as well. Much like how I would probably shrug off something that came out in 2016, 2017 as not that memorable, but some younger kid or whatever might be like, no, that movie is my favorite movie of all time. And I think that we do forget to think about things in this context. We forget to think about things subjectively from our own experiences. People want to pretend that they are super objective and clever when it comes to, you know, film analysis in that kind of way. But I do think that everybody has their own frame of reference that we all have to go off of. And yeah, Insidious to me is an important movie. It might not be to other people. And I think that we often forget that our important movies aren't necessarily the same as everybody else's. My point is, am I safe in assuming that most people know what the movie La La Land is? Or is that an ignorant dick move? Is that big enough? Was that popular enough? Or am I being an asshole? And that's kind of obscure. I literally don't know, and I'm asking you. I'm not exactly sure. And if so or if not, if that is safe to assume or not, where exactly is the line? Can I safely assume that people know what The Matrix is? That's hugely popular, right? Everybody knows what The Matrix is, don't they? Maybe they don't. I don't know. And at the same time, can I assume that most people know what the Jim Carrey comedy Bruce Almighty is? Because that movie made nearly $500 million. So obviously a lot of people saw it. But no, I'm assuming I can't. I'm assuming there are still a lot of people who don't know what Bruce Almighty is, or even less so who have actually seen it. And so if I come up with a smirk on my face and spell out the word beautiful like
B-E-A-beautiful,
depending on the company I'm with, that could either be a hilarious and fun little shared experience, or it could just be annoying and confusing. And I think a lot of film fans kind of do this and forget what other people know.
Like, cheers in rain.
what?
It's a reference. That's my humor. Abed gets it.
Like my brother-in-law, for example, he's awesome, I love him, but he loves the movie Anchorman. One which I'm not that big a fan of. It's okay, it has funny moments and whatever, but it's not imprinted into my brain like it is on him. And so often when we are together, he will quote some random-ass Anchorman quote.
Breaking news. Cannonball!
And I'll be like, what? I don't know what you're talking about. He'll assume that I know that. To be fair, he also assumes that because I know a lot about movies, or at least I like movies a lot. I don't know if I know a lot about movies, but I like movies a lot. But I also have a very bad memory, which also plays a part in this. I don't remember a lot of quotes, particularly movies I don't love all that much. So sorry, Rob, I don't know Anchorman as well as you, sorry. Anyway, because I remember growing up and being drowned in a sea of references and comedy movies that I liked and adults saying jokes and etc., all of which that I didn't understand.
I do not want another single pop culture reference out of you for the rest of the trip, you understand?
My experience was always that I often got annoyed and considered a lot of older people to be ignorant in terms of understanding my experience. Now, obviously this isn't the biggest complaint in the world to make, but I remember eventually coming to accept that I just couldn't understand a lot of references in my life for the time being. Like, I loved The Simpsons growing up, for example, but that show would always joke about things that I often had no familiarity at all with, where they'd joke and poke fun at old celebrities from or before the time, and I'd be watching, episodes 15 years later down the line after the release date with a total blank face before Homer eventually did something stupid, and my attention would return full focus. At the time though, I never really looked at me not understanding these sorts of references as me being dumb, but I understood that this probably just meant that eventually I would grow up to experience more modern media that I would understand, and it would be my time to shine and make these references, and everybody would know what I was talking about. But then, movies all of a sudden later on when I grew up a bit became to be about 80s nostalgia, and I still didn't understand anything. But that's another issue. Anyway, it might seem obvious to say that certain age brackets know different pieces of media, just like how I'm sure that there would be trends in what content is being watched from household to household, depending on many factors, and so maybe this all seems redundant to say out loud in a video. But I kind of had an epiphany when I was talking to my 15-year-old cousin recently. I was talking to him about movies, and eventually one thing led to another in which I figured out that he didn't know who Borat was.
Hold up. Something right.
The Sacha Baron Cohen straight-up banger of a 2006 comedy character was not part of his go-tos when it came to an example of comedy movies, and to be fair, why the hell would it be? I mean, he wasn't even born until a year after that film's release. But once we discussed it, he actually did come to realize that he was sort of familiar with the character because a sequel had come out a year or two ago that his dad watched. But otherwise, he didn't really know Borat as a whole. But the point is, that's how quickly our frame of reference becomes outdated. With roughly a decade's difference in our age, that's as fast as it can be till I become the old man, spouting out about some weird old shit that he doesn't care about. So I guess what I'm saying is I sympathize with the adults in media from my childhood who maybe just assumed I was familiar with things when I wasn't. Time slips by so fast, man. And with that comes gaps in knowledge. I'm not calling anyone dumb for not knowing some movie or whatever, but I just mean literally, there are gaps in people's knowledge for certain things, just like how there are certainly massive gaps in knowledge for me, in most things, because I'm an idiot. But no, I mean even movie-wise, I have a pretty big blind spot for older movies still to this day, for example. There are definitely large parts of movies that I still don't really know and I'm not really that familiar with, and that's okay. But it's not just dictated by time, the gaps in some people's knowledge. It might shock you to say, but there's also the fact that a lot of people don't care about movies as much as you or I. And so to these people, the frame of references in the movie world become even smaller, in which it really isn't safe to assume that they know what the hell you're talking about with certain movies. Like the fact that Spiral is part of the Saw franchise, for example. Like, I went to a Saw-style escape room recently, and one of the clues had to do with a spiral. And I mentioned to the worker that Spiral was the ninth one. That's all the context I gave. And she was like, what? What the hell are you talking about? And I'm like, oh, right. Just because you work here, that probably doesn't mean you know all this stuff about Saw and whatever. It was probably a dick move for me to assume that they knew what the hell I would be talking about. But I was surrounded by a lot of Saw things, so maybe my mind was warped. I was also trapped in a room, technically. Anyway, for as obvious as it is to me that Spiral is the 9th Saw movie, somebody else might jump right back to me with sports statistics that I would know nothing about or care about in the slightest at all. Like, ask me to name an athlete and I'd be lucky to name like 10 from different sports. If I had to name 10 from the same sport, I'd be absolutely fucked. I couldn't do it. Movie directors though, and I'm your boy, I could definitely do that. Someone who really knows their shit though, like Quentin Tarantino for example, I'm sure knows much more about movies than I will ever know or even care to know. And that's what I mean when I say that these things come in tiers, because even though I'm a big film nerd, I'd consider myself to be, I'm nothing in comparison to Quentin Tarantino. And that's what I mean when I say that these things come in tiers. Sometimes when I'm listening to a movie podcast, for example, and whichever podcast it is might not know how many Nightmare on Elm Street movies there are or whatever, and I'll sometimes be annoyed and be like, you're a movie podcast, how do you not know this shit? But then realize that typically horror is a pretty niche genre. Not a lot of people know all that much about horror, and so maybe they know who Freddy Krueger is, but not necessarily how many movies he was in. And I feel like horror from then on, after A Nightmare on Elm Street's popularity, only became more and more niche. And this is where the confusion comes in. Ari Aster's 2019 horror title Midsommar is a film that feels like it's very known about to me. The YouTubers I watch know what it is. My friends know what it is. My parents, who I made watch it, now know what it is. But maybe the average person doesn't know what it is. Maybe for as big an impact as a movie like that seems to have made in my circles, I might forget that I also typically put myself in heavily curated social situations. To be that in person or online, that a lot of the things and people I follow on social media are fairly movie-centric. Midsommar is known to people like this. Not to mention being on social media to begin with skews the statistics that much more to a younger population for the most part. And younger people are also more likely to care or pay attention to movies like these and movies that have come out in the past 5 years or so. Everybody's frame of reference is different, and movies that have come out in the past 5 years might seem more important to a young person than to an older person with a vaster experience in movie watching. And this all made me come to the realization that I believe that movies feel more temporary in the grand scheme of things. Like that offhand 5 years example of a timeline that I just pulled just then. I think that's a good timeline to give in terms of thinking about what movies became remembered down the line. I've been thinking about it lately and how quickly movies come in and out of the limelight and how fast we all seem to move on to the next big thing. The next exciting, sexy title with a brand new set of trailers and online discussions to watch and participate in. In the past decade, movies have become part of the rotating news cycle in a more drastic way than I think had ever been the case before. And I'm part of that too, being a YouTuber who talks about new releases half the time. But it's true that I think a lot of people often watch new films and then kind of discard them in their memories not too long after. There's less of a lasting cultural impact when it comes to modern cinema. I think at least to people who don't live and breathe movies anyway. And I think it's different from how it used to be because so much more content is created and released nowadays than ever before. This is such a random example, but it makes me think of the movie When Harry Met Sally, which is a perfectly fine rom-com, I guess, from the 80s. I'm not crazy about it, but it's like whatever. It's cute enough, I guess it's fine. But it's considered a freaking classic by a lot of people. It's got a pretty recognizable name, and it's been referenced out the wazoo by older media, especially when it comes to the infamous cafe scene, in which one of the titular characters fakes an orgasm, and all the boomers in the world thought that was the funniest fucking thing in the world for some reason. But what if that movie, exactly as it is, was released today for the first time? Do you think that this is a movie that would be remembered years down the line if it was just randomly dropped on Netflix and this was a new release, exactly the same way, exactly as it is? Because I would say, fuck no, absolutely not. No one would care. It'd be on the same level of like something like The Kissing Booth or the His or That Gender Swap remake. It'd be watched by casual audiences and then promptly forgotten. At most, we'd all watch it over the weekend, talk about it on Monday morning or whatever, make our little videos or internet posts about it and be done with it. And that's about it. Movies aren't made with the same mindset today, or at least not released with the same mindset, or especially definitely not consumed with the same mindset. As per another random ass example of how older movies used to function though, I was recently-ish watching the 90s movie Clueless, and during it I was just thinking about how they don't make it like these anymore. Not that I think that Clueless is the epitome of cinema or anything, but in the literal sense, they literally don't make teenage-centric, big-budget drama comedies that don't do much in terms of plot, but are there just to be kind of fun anymore because they don't do well in cinemas. Teenagers don't give a shit about cinemas. I think, unfortunately, cinemas are more of an adult interest nowadays, and teenagers teenagers instead flock to streaming. They'd rather watch a show, if that. Honestly, TikTok and whatever probably trumps all to Gen Z. I don't fucking know. I don't want to sound like an old boomer or whatever saying TikTok is ruining your brain and whatever though, because I enjoy myself a TikTok, or at least a reel. I don't actually have TikTok, but I watch the reels on Instagram because I'm an old person. Anyway, this is why Hollywood though has pivoted younger audience aimed things away from cinemas. And this is why Pixar doesn't even get theatrical releases anymore. Movies aren't viewed in the same way. And since there's such a wide net of content out there, movies become secondary or even tertiary in terms of entertainment options. Having not thought of them as competitors much before, I now realize just how much social media, video games, and yes, TV series as well play a part in the issue. The issue though isn't even about how they're consumed. It's about how movies are made because of how they're consumed. See, I hate the idea of a film not being made with the intention of making a lasting impact. To me, movies have always been special because they're perfect little depictions of whatever piece of this world they're going for. And they're time capsules made to evoke emotion. Movies can be another home to return to for comfort over and over again, or they can be a thrill to endure that leaves a lasting impression. Movies to me are for forever. But maybe to other people, all that movies are or have ever been are cultural milestones that only those who strongly appreciate the medium really love. Maybe to other people, movies aren't as important as I've always thought of them as. Have movies changed? Has watching them changed and the audience has changed? Or have I changed? Hey, so this is a different day and I kind of wanted to add something to this video that felt sort of relevant, okay? Maybe it's not, I don't know. But it's kind of all about me getting older and realizing how fast time goes by and how that's kind of scary and it's kind of weird, and I just wanted to kind of contextualize it with media that I like and talk a little bit about this feeling that I've had for kind of a long time now. That's like this idea of newness, kind of like stale newness. It's kind of this feeling that I can't shake off, where I often feel like things that are getting quite a bit older still feel weirdly new to me, and I'm wondering if anybody else gets this, if anybody else feels this way, because I don't know, it's like this weird thing I feel like where I've got some examples over here written out. It's like Scream 4, the movie Scream 4 for example, that still feels new to me in a weird way, even though it came out in 2011, okay, it came out 11 years ago, but it still feels kind of weirdly new to me. Maybe it's because it's kind of a nostalgic film. It's about bringing the old characters that we love back together. But for some reason, even when I watch it now after Scream 5 or just Scream having come out, it still feels like kind of a new film to me for some reason, and it's something that I don't think will ever go away. I think I could watch it in 50 years and it will still feel like the new one. Maybe this kind of thing resonates higher with like sequels and reboots and spin-offs and that kind of stuff, like this feeling of this old thing still being new. I don't know, it's kind of like the Ninja Turtles movies from 2014 and 2016, you know, the Michael Bay produced ones. Yeah, you probably forgot those existed because I don't think there's really anybody that's like the biggest fan of those, but they still feel weirdly new to me as well. I don't know why. I think maybe it's just defined by the time that they came out in my life, how old I was and all that kind of stuff, but like it just feels super weird to me when I think about how old certain things are. It's like the Hunger Games franchise, that last film, Mockingjay Part 2, you might not be that familiar with it, but if you are, that last one came out in 2015. That's 7 years ago now, right? Do kids still give a shit about the Hunger Games? I imagine not. I imagine not. In my mind, it's like this young person, it's like this hip new thing, right? Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit there, but like I find it weird that like I'm sure the young people have probably moved on from that, and I'm probably not even familiar with the thing that the young people like nowadays. The young people. The damn Gen Zers. I think I'm just part of Gen Z. I'm like, me and my wife argue about this all the time. We're like the 1 year, we're cuspers. We're kind of both. I don't know. Anyway, it's like the Amazing Spider-Man films still feel kind of new to me when I watch them, just because the Tobey Maguire ones are really the new ones. But then, you know, No Way Home then came out, and it's like, yeah, okay, the Andrew Garfield ones are old enough to be nostalgic for now. It's official. I mean, the first Andrew Garfield one came out 10 years years ago. It came out in 2012, so it's like, you know, and other things. There are other examples of older things now too that are surprising. Like Man of Steel came out in 2013, right? And that is weird to think about, especially when it comes to the fact that Henry Cavill still feels kind of new in the role. It feels like he never quite settled in fully. Like I still have been waiting for like his defining moment as the character. It just doesn't really feel like they ever really landed it. But in comparison, Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man went from 2008 to 2019, and he defined that role for sure. Like he is the face of the MCU, or at least was for a long time. And like I just feel like he made so much more of an impact in that character than Henry Cavill did as Superman. But when you actually think about the years, if we assume that Henry Cavill's still in the role, I don't know if he is or not, but let's just assume he is. He's only been in that role 2 years less than Iron Man. You know, Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man was in it for 11 years. Henry Cavill is in his 9th year, if we assume that he's still in the role. And that's just bizarre to me. Like, he made so much more of an impact. But talking about the MCU as well, the MCU itself started when I was 12 years old in 2008, right? I have a very unique relationship to the MCU that's slightly different from anybody who is a bit younger or a bit older than me, you know? People who are a bit younger probably feel even closer to it. It's been around their entire life. I had some life before the MCU, but not a lot of it. I still definitely grew up with the MCU. And people who are a bit older than me are like, yeah, I mean, they've been around for a long time, but it probably doesn't like define their life. It doesn't define cinema as much to those people, and it's kind of weird to think about. I'm 26 now. The MCU has been around for a long fucking time, and it's still going strong. But I also feel the opposite of this weird newness that I can't shake off with newer films in this franchise and other franchises as well. But it's like Infinity War came out in 2018. That's 4 years ago. But it feels ancient. It feels like we've moved past that so much so quickly. I don't know. Like Infinity War just feels like ancient history. Yeah, we're done with that. You know what I mean? Like, and I think about other newer films like that as well. And it's weird that they came out however many years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. I don't know. Maybe it's how much of an impact they made culture-wise that changes this, that affects this. Like Logan, for example, came out in 2017. That's fucking 5 years ago. That's kind of a long time. I'm starting to realize through films that I love just how quickly a fucking decade can pass. How quickly time can pass. I think of like, it's not a movie, but The Walking Dead started in 2010 when I was 14 years old. I remember watching it with my family when it just started, and it's still going. I think it's ending soon now, but it's so ancient now. It's like this old legacy franchise nowadays. But like in my mind, it doesn't feel that long ago where I was sitting down with my family to watch it. There's these weird things that I can't shake off. It's like The Simpsons, for example. The Simpsons, the golden era of The Simpsons, we all kind of agree is from seasons 2 to 8, maybe to 10, something like that. Or at least, or maybe even the first season. The first 10 seasons of The Simpsons, okay, safe bet. That is the golden era of The Simpsons that we all agree is the very best, right? But man, I gotta tell you, we didn't even hit the 2000s in that era. We didn't hit the year 2000 until halfway through season 11. And it's like, what I think of past season 10 of The Simpsons, that's the new stuff. That's the crap stuff that I don't like, right? But it's like, even that stuff, even seasons 11 to 20, the 2000s, we're not even into the 2010s yet. And that is bizarre to think about because, yeah, anything past season 10 of The Simpsons feels like that new age shit that I don't want to see. Actually, it's not even that bad. I've actually been recently watching some of the newer seasons of The Simpsons and I don't mind it. It's not that bad. Everyone kind of exaggerates how bad it is. No, it's not the classic stuff, but anyway, this isn't about The Simpsons. But that does remind me though, something else that I was watching recently, 21 Jump Street. That came out in 2012, right? And I realized while watching it halfway through that actually it's now a nostalgic movie for me. And I didn't really realize that it was gonna be when I popped it on, you know? Like, because it is very much a film about high school and about being young and about growing up out of that and about being lame now. And I related to it so much now. So much more than I thought I was going to. Because, you know, it's about these characters who I guess are about my age. They're what, you know, 8 to 10 years out of high school, whatever it is. And, you know, how much they don't fit in and how much they don't understand the new generation nowadays. And it's like, oh, shit. Last time I watched these films, you know, I was in high school and it was funny to watch these guys not fit in and stuff. But now, in this kind of weird retroactive nostalgic thing where they're still in 2012, but I'm watching it at an older age, and I don't feel like I fit in sometimes in certain ways with the hip trends with TikTok and whatever the fuck. It was weirdly relatable and nostalgic to me. Like, I wanted to go back to 2012 when I was still in high school and when I was still the cool young person and whatever. Basically, the point of this video is me realizing just how rapidly I'm aging and getting old and getting lame and out of touch. But I don't know, it's kind of true. It's like this weird thing that I can't shake off, like I said, where like things still feel new to me and I can't really get rid of that feeling, and it weirds me out. Okay, this is a really specific example that if you know nothing about this, you won't give a shit. But Screaming Bloody Murder, the album by Sum 41, who was my favorite band of all time when I was younger, that album is 11 years old and they've made like 2 or 3 more albums since then. But Screaming Bloody Murder in my mind is still new. I still feel like I'm still learning it. Like, that's not true. I know the songs quite well, but like I forget that I know them well because I'm like, no, those are the new ones. Take me back to the classic stuff. All Killer No Filler or Chuck or whatever. I don't know. I forget which albums are which, to be honest. There's also Yumi at Six's Sinners Never Sleep, which came out the same year. That's 11 years old. If you don't give a shit about this music, you're not going to care about this point, but it freaks me the fuck out that those are 11 years old because I remember when they came out. I don't know if that makes any sense. I imagine this is a sensation that older people get, and this is not something that's going to go away. But it's just odd to me. I don't know. It's weird. It's this weird thing that I can't get rid of, this weird feeling that I just can't fully define, and it's something that freaks me out quite often, where I'm like, Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad is my favorite TV series of all time, by far. That ended in 2013. Next year, it will have ended 10 years ago. And I guess maybe once you think about Better Call Saul having come out a few years later and having 6 seasons itself, it's not actually that weird to think that Breaking Bad ended 10 years ago. But it's also bizarre. I just think about all the things that I used to like when I was a kid, when I was younger, and I think about newer things as well, like Game of Thrones. That ended in 2019. Remember that season that you probably hated and everybody hated to their deep core, and it probably feels like ancient history now because it's over. It's so long ago. We're so far removed from it and we don't give a shit about Game of Thrones anymore. That only ended 3 years ago. I don't know, it goes both ways. Things can be surprising when you think about how old or not actually that old they are, and maybe it's how much of an impact they made on our culture. I think that has a huge thing to do with it, and I also think that this feeling resonates with things that are like reboots and remakes a little bit more as well, because you think of original films like Get Out that came out in 2017, it's like, yeah, maybe that feels about right. But then you think about the remakes of Friday the 13th and A Nightmare on Elm Street, which came out in 2009, 2010 respectively, and it's like, those still feel new and like they shouldn't have been made because they're like these, you know, new things that didn't need to be made, but they're both over a decade old. And I actually like both of those movies, especially the Friday the 13th 2009 remake. And I guess that's all I wanted to say. I don't know, this is kind of rambly at this point, okay? I know, I'm not saying that much that is probably news to you, but it's just kind of this revelation I'm having where I'm like, I'm old, I'm dying. Sorry if that was a bit rambly, sorry if you didn't get the idea. Everything comes in generations. Everybody has their own frame of reference and stuff. And I feel like movies are becoming temporary. I feel like we become less and less relatable over the generations. I feel like we connect less and less within separate generations when it comes to film. Like, I can't share, you know, a newer film with a lot of older people. They probably might not know it, and vice versa, and all that kind of stuff. I feel like movies used to be like, this is the one, this is the memorable one. Everybody knows Jaws. You know, everybody knows The Terminator. But I feel like we don't get things of that caliber anymore. I feel like it's impossible to get that. I feel like even things like the Avengers and whatever, we all love them, but they get so much hate as well. I don't know, maybe this is my ignorance because I wasn't around for that time, but I feel like, you know, something like Jaws probably didn't get that hate back in the day. Everybody looked at it as, that's a movie. You know what I mean? But nowadays, an Avengers movie will come out and people will say, that's not a movie, that's content, that's shit. And maybe this is a whole other argument, maybe that's another discussion, I don't know. But yeah, it's just, movies are different than how they used to be. I don't know if that's a problem or not. It's just interesting to think about. And so that's all that I have to say. Thanks for watching. Do the things, please, and I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye.